Well, you can tell, obviously, I'm a woman. And all my adult life, I've been involved in lots of conversations about, well, what is a woman? And that's really come about because the whole debate about gender equality, as we now call it, the whole idea about the word feminism, the whole idea about equal opportunities, all of that has prompted lots of discussions between men and women and between women and girls about, well, what's a woman and what's a woman's purpose and what's a woman's role and what is possible for a woman and what's not possible for a woman, etc., etc., etc. But that's produced an enormous amount of literature, an amount of language, an amount of analysis, statistics, all sorts of things that even though we haven't got gender equality anywhere in the world, there is a language that women and girls have become used to discuss the idea of who they are. And that can be really helpful. But is the same the case for boys and men? I thought maybe it wasn't really. That actually, in a way, the world was almost saying, well, boys and men are fine. Boys and men are in a position that they need to be, and they can just be left alone. And alone is probably the word I'd like to focus on. No group of people are in a world that never changes. And the world for boys and men is changing enormously. And yet the conversations that allow boys and men to talk about how they feel about a changing world with relationship to being a boy or being a man, those platforms, those ideas, those opportunities didn't seem to be there very much and still don't. I mean, even thinking of starting a festival where you say it's an opportunity for boys and men to talk about masculinity, you know, some people laugh as if to say, well, what do they need it for? You know, aren't they all fine anyway? And let's just think about some of the statistics, and that's just in this country. You might be shocked, I was shocked, to know that the highest cause of death for men and boys between the ages of 15 and 49, the highest cause of death in the UK is suicide. So that's not a good thing. I mean, that suggests that terrible crisis of should I exist or not for so many men comes into play without society being able to respond quick enough to help that person make a different choice. And then if you go alongside of that idea of suicide, depression and all the areas that go with that for men is statistically much, much higher for boys and men than it is for women. The prison population, we have the highest prison population in Europe, which obviously says something about our legal system. But most of the people in prison are boys and men, boys being anybody under 18. And so on. So just in terms of opportunities to make a success of your life, or even to have your life to its full length of time, boys and men in this country are obviously having challenges. And I don't know whether enough people are coming around to support and think and talk. The other thing that we need to be aware of in a changing world is that the statistics on the different distributions. So let's just take the idea that, you know, when my dad was growing up, my dad's here at some stage today, and he's 93. Well, being the breadwinner was what blokes did. But nowadays in Britain, the number of households where the man is the breadwinner has fallen so rapidly that actually women are more likely to be the principal breadwinner. And is that talked about enough when house husbands and the idea of house husbands is still something which sounds, you know, a bit odd, a bit weird, and a bit unnatural as far as some people are concerned? Violence. We talk a lot, and we should talk a lot about violence between men and women. But there's also a tremendous amount of violence and more violence from men to men. And we know that it's not just gang culture, as we call it, but all kinds of different sorts of violences. And bullying in the workplace and online, we talk a lot about it as something which relates to women, but it relates to boys and men. How much we can ever rely on statistics? Well, who knows? But apparently, 4 out of 5 men are not happy with their body image. And they cite having a beer belly and lack of muscle as the two of the things they're most unhappy about. Now, just looking at you, you're all obviously beautiful. But that idea of feeling negative about what you look like and what your body's like, it's something that is a problem. Now, all humans are going to have problems. All humans' stories are full of anxieties and doubts and insecurities, and I just include myself in that. But if you've got no way of feeling that you're allowed to talk about it, or allowed to share it, or allowed to realize that you're not the only one, in fact, you're by no means the minority, you're the majority, you can feel very isolated very quickly. And if you're not allowed to talk, you're not allowed to show your feelings, then how do other people know, A, that you need help, or how can you give help to other people? And, I was thinking recently about the fact that when we started doing Being a Man, I asked lots and lots of boys and men to come and just think about what could the festival be about, what should it be about, what are the themes? Not all of it is about crisis. I mean, it's about cars, and it's about art, and it's about dancing, and it's about all the amazing things that boys and men are doing in the world, and how to celebrate that fact and not make boys and men feel they're always being criticised. But we also talked with a lot of boys and men about their dads, and a lot of people, in fact the majority of people, said that they had a peculiar relationship with their father. Either they didn't feel that their father was very present, or he might not even be there at all, or they felt the father, if he was there, he wasn't sort of emotionally there for them. And the number of people who had fantastic relationships with their dad seemed very small. And that then brought us another set of conversations, which was, when I become a dad, or I am now a dad, how do I be a good one? What does being a good dad look like? So this whole thing of fatherhood seemed a very major discussion point. There are many, many other things that came up in all those conversations. And I stress again that when people say there's a crisis in masculinity, I know how I'd feel if you said there's a crisis in the female race. I think, well, actually, there are lots of problems, but there are some wonderful things to celebrate. And so I want to stress again the fact that the reason I suppose I started the festival was because I love a lot of men. I have a lot of men in my life that I love. And I want them to be happy and to succeed. And I don't want society to make jokes about men and put men down and make boys feel as if they're not entitled to have feelings and they can't cry and they can't do things. Basically, I want men to, enjoy everything that life has to offer in the way that we're trying to say that girls and women should be able to do that too. So have we got enough time and space for boys and men to enjoy and discover who they could be? What's the best that they could be? Well, we thought not, and that's why we decided we'd start this festival. It's great to see so many people of all ages here, and over the weekend there's so many things to discuss. And of course there's girls and women here as well, and thank you for supporting the investigation into Being a Man. When we do the WOW Festival, the Women of the World Festival, we also have men and boys come to that. And we always sort of say it's a great opportunity to hear from people about what they're feeling, not necessarily being told by other people what they ought to feel. And this is the other thing I wanted to say finally, which is that, you can say what you like. I mean, be completely candid and open. There's nothing here about sort of this is what you ought to feel and we ought to think. It's a whole weekend of investigation to find out what you might think and what you might think one day, because certainly over the years that I've been alive, I've changed my views about lots of things. But you're going to hear from many different people who've got experiences to share, and some of them are tough experiences, and some of them are absolutely wonderful, and some of them are silly. Because, if you can't have a laugh as well, that would be really sad. You'll see around the edge there's beginnings of market stalls coming over the weekend. There's, for those of you who haven't been over the back of the hall yet, there's a DB6 James Bond's car. It's not actually his car, but it is owned by somebody who's very like James Bond. And you can go and have a look at that. Some of you I know are going to the mentoring at 10:30, or 11 o'clock rather. And But first up, as they say, I've been trying to get Jimmie Briggs here for several years. First of all for the Women of the World Festival, and then for the Being a Man Festival. And finally we've managed to get him to come from the States, even though it's Thanksgiving Day today. I said to him that was really kind of him to come. And and to have a conversation about the work that he's been doing. He's highly acclaimed in the United States and across the globe for a range of things to do with his analysis and approach and determination to get society to look at violence generally. So we're going to go straight in with quite a tough theme, as you can see. He wrote a book about 10 years ago now, I think, on child soldiers called Innocence Lost, When Child Soldiers Go to War. And it was as a result of the work that he was doing as a journalist. And subsequently, he founded something called Man Up, which is a global campaign that is about working with youth to stop violence against women and girls. He's got another book coming up shortly called Blood Work, which is actually about manhood. And in that period between writing the book on child soldiers and this next book 10 years later on manhood, he himself has had some real challenges, which we're going to talk about. So he's got lots of... I can just tell you he's amazingly important, but he's a member of the Project for the Advancement of Our Common Humanity. He's won lots of awards. He was part of the Women's 21 Leaders for the 21st Century. He's winner of the 2010 GQ magazine Better Men, Better World. And, you know, he's been a force for good in general. And really, really pleased to welcome him to the stage. Jimmie Briggs, thank you. I'll go to that. Okay, thank you. If you can't see, if anybody's sitting beside a pillar, you feel free to shuffle your chair over or move a bit. Jimmie, I said to you this morning, you know, as you saw a lot of the people coming in, you said, oh, it's so fantastic because there's so many young people here, so many boys, young men. And I wanted to start by asking you, you know, when you were a journalist, you were presumably like in the big field of the tough stuff that looks very heroic. And now a lot of the work that you do is going around schools and prisons and institutions where actually people can't see bravery in any obvious way. But that's what you now feel your calling is. And I just wondered if you'd sort of talk to us about why you once upon a time were in the heroic journalist field, and now you're working in a very, very careful way on trying to change people's thinking.
First of all, thank you so much, Jude, for having me come be a part of the festival. As you know, I was actually a part of the WOW Festival when it took place this summer in New York and Harlem. Thank you. Yeah, we'll figure it out.
We're being a bit technically challenged here by a mic.
And
you can go.
I think they can still hear me. Okay. And so for me, it's been an interesting journey. And as I said this morning before we started, I'm so enthused to see so many young men and boys, presumably from schools, present this morning. And I was reflecting, looking at the boys I see throughout the audience, because when I was their age, 12, 13, 14, and younger, speaking about heroism, you know, I bought into the ideology that to be seen as a man or to be seen as masculine, I had to exemplify the prototypical traits of being a man, which are universal. I mean, you know, the definition, traditional definition of manhood, it's the same in New York City, it's the same in London, it's the same in Johannesburg, it's the same in Delhi. I mean, men are the same in so many ways, culture aside. And you know, I went into journalism, as you say, that heroic journalism, because, frankly, and I didn't see it this way at the time, but I felt I had something to prove about my manhood, my strength, growing up, and really until after university. You know, I really did not. I felt very emasculated. I was someone growing up who was, you know, seen as overly sensitive. I cried a lot for different slights, different pains. I was not this height until after university. My voice is obviously not this deep until after university, and you know, because of that, I was bullied a lot. I was ostracized for different things, for not being, you know, sporty or athletic enough, for loving to read, kind of being a nerd, being a science geek. I was meant to be a doctor and decided not to become a doctor. And so, I mean, I love journalism. I want to tell stories, but I became a journalist for so many reasons, and then became eventually a war journalist, primarily because I wanted to, prove to my community, but maybe prove to myself that I was stronger than people assumed I was. And after doing that for so many years, I realized, that was an easy, really cheap pathway, I can say now, to being a man. I mean, the work that I'm doing now, the transformation I'm still undergoing now, the journey I'm on personally, for me is that's the hard stuff. That's the hard work that never ends, about really coming up with a definition of self that is affirming, that's healthy, that you can respect, but also that those around you can respect as well.
Can I just say, you said, look, in every single culture in the world, whatever the culture is, whatever the place in geography is, being a man has the same set of definitions. Can you just, and we probably all think we know what those are, but what are they?
Well, I mean, I think some of the obvious ones, and I saw this, so the negative consequences of this as a journalist often, physical prowess, as an athlete, as someone who's into sport, excelling on the pitch, excelling on the court, excelling in the pool, whatever it is. So there's physical prowess, sexual prowess, being very comfortable and I guess for lack of a better phrase, being a dog when it comes to women, sexually active, sexually promiscuous, being the prototypical alpha male, someone who's in control, who's dominant, who makes quick decisions without reflection, doesn't show vulnerability, only shows a certain range of emotions. I think those are some of the broad outlines that are generally accepted as being a man. You don't cry. You don't appear to be soft. Showing emotions such as anger or aggressiveness, that's okay. That's acceptable. But to cry, to be sensitive, to have physical intimacy, non-sexual or otherwise, with another man or with a woman, partner, or friend, whatever, that's typically not seen as being a man.
And what we'll come to, I want to come to the work that you're doing in a minute. And incidentally, we will pass to you shortly for questions. So perhaps you want to start thinking about what you would like to ask Jimmie. But when you were a journalist, I know that some of the work that you were doing, obviously you were in terrible war-torn spaces, but you then wrote that book about child soldiers. And the training of child soldiers, who are largely boys, and very young boys, does the training need to emphasize this idea of a proper man? What does the training require for boys to become killers and rapists, which is what they have to be?
Well, it was interesting. One of the situation I focused on for my book was Sri Lanka. And I spent about 2 or 3 years in Sri Lanka, off and on between 1999 and 2001. And that's the first place I saw. But one of the things they did, which I eventually saw in other places, was that before going into a fight or some sort of battle, or if you want to call it a battle, with usually government forces, these adult commanders would show kids films, Rambo, Schwarzenegger films, Bruce Willis, all these hyper masculine films of exaggerated violence. They would show them these films and then send them out. I mean, I watched it so many times. These video cassettes on VHS players, and they would show these really as they would give them drugs sometimes too, but show them this imagery as a way of saying we want you to emulate this. This is what being a strong soldier. This is the type of masculinity we want you to aspire towards reaching when you go out with your weapon. And and now so many years later, we do that now in civil society. There's a reason, I'm not sure about here in the UK, but in the US, there's a reason why young people, young men primarily, who are adept at playing video games that are so hyper-realistic, are often targeted or recruited by the military or intelligence agencies to fly drones or to serve in that way, using really these video controls. That war is becoming that now. So we're really, in a way, we're preparing young people to fight these virtual wars by the games that we produce and disseminate to them. We target them to buy and to become adept at playing.
Any journalist in a field of war has a problem. My guess is, like, you see horrific things, you haven't got the time, space, or appropriate opportunity to show your emotions, because you've actually got to write copy and post it and file it and et cetera, et cetera. But what impact did all of that violence, seeing all that violence, have on your ability to access your own feelings?
It's interesting. After we met yesterday to debrief about this weekend, I had an early dinner with a friend of mine who's a British photojournalist who lives here in London. I had not seen her since the last time I was here 4 years ago, and we were catching up and talking. And it's interesting. It was interesting talking to her last night before coming here this morning, because I was up late last night because of the time difference and it being Thanksgiving and having to call relatives on Skype and all that. But I was thinking at the same time, I think I know I was a good journalist. I did my job well, and at times I was recognized for that. But being a journalist was not good for me, because in truth, I was too sensitive, and I wanted to cry a lot, and I couldn't allow myself to do that consciously, and I did get too personal, too close to the subjects and things that I was seeing, but still being caught in that man box, the box that says, you can't, if you go outside this box, you'll be seen as less than, or you'll be seen as weak, or you'll be seen as compromised and not able to do your job. I couldn't go outside that man box, but still inside I was coming apart, and I didn't know how to process it. I didn't know how to talk about it. When I was doing that work at the height of my career as a journalist, I was married at the time, and my marriage fell apart because I didn't know how to talk about what I would come back home, and it's almost like being an astronaut. I presume you go into space and you come back to Earth, and how do you talk to people who've never been to space about it? Conceptually, I could never understand what it's like to be in space looking down on Earth. And I felt the same way in my relationships. But I knew I had to talk about it. I wanted to, because of what I was doing inside. And eventually it got to the point that it was just untenable for me to keep working and not want to hurt myself or be hyper depressed or whatever,
Mm-hmm. So it turns back in on yourself somehow.
Right, yeah.
So what was the trigger that made you to start the Man Up project? And could you explain what the Man Up project is? Because it's now such a famous project.
Yeah. I think, as we were saying yesterday, I'll be honest with you, Jude. I'll be honest with you all. Coming to conversations like this, I so enjoy it. I learn so much. I love doing it because I feel like I grow from it. And at the same time, it feels like such an accident to me. I'm like, why am I here? Why am I on stage? He could talk as much as I could talk about this issue, I'm sure. And I think I often ask myself, if I was not a journalist, if I did not have a daughter, would I even be here? Would I be called to this? Maybe I would just be living my life and, have a good life, and that'd be fine for me. But, as I did have a daughter, I was a journalist, and at a certain point, I think I was telling you yesterday, I remember when it happened. I was in Eastern Congo 7 years ago. I was in the Eastern Congo doing a magazine article and also filming a piece for a program at ABC television in the States. And the story was about rape and war, talking to rape survivors, to women in the Congo about being raped, and then also talking to men, mainly soldiers, who were raping women. So I was getting both perspectives. And one day in Eastern Congo, 7 years ago, I remember the day vividly, I was talking to a 20-year-old rape survivor, a woman who'd been gang raped multiple times. Her family, her husband, and her kids have been killed in that process, killed in front of her. And I just remember talking to her over a period of hours and doing something I never did before. I broke down, I started crying. I mean, almost uncontrollably crying, and I'd reached my limit. My cup was full in terms of the trauma, and I just couldn't. I'm like, I can't do this anymore. I'm done. It's a wrap. And so I said, in that moment, I said, this is my last story. I will never be a journalist again. I can't take this anymore. But I knew that I want to honor her story and the stories of other women, of other kids, of other parents, of other mothers, of other sisters and daughters who suffered because of gender or violence or trauma. I had to honor their journeys and honor the stories they shared with me. So after that story, after that assignment, I went back home to New York and, spent about 2 or 3 months just doing nothing, really sitting around at home, walking around the city, having coffee at Starbucks a lot, and I had an epiphany and said, I want to start something that will empower young people, such as these young men here, to do something about gender violence, to talk about their own journey of manhood, to talk about how they can change the definition of masculinity. And so that vision was Man Up. And so we launched Man Up campaign at the World Cup in South Africa in 2010 in Johannesburg. And over the course of 1 week, it was the last week of the World Cup in South Africa, the FIFA World Cup, and we brought together young people from 25 countries, mainly in sub-Saharan Africa, Central and South America, and a few countries in South Asia and then in the Middle East. And over the course of that week, we trained them. We brought in speakers and lecturers. We had small group conversations, mentoring conversations. And the vision, Jude, was to prepare these young people, mainly men, but also young women, work in collaboration. The vision was to prepare them to go back to their respective countries, their respective communities, and to create initiatives, community-based initiatives, using sports, using arts, using technology, that would engage their peers, and at the same around the issue of gender equity, around the issue of healthy masculinity, around the issue of stopping violence against women and girls based on gender. And so now, 5 years later, the youth who we brought to South Africa are still working on their projects, still, really have evolved into powerful leaders and advocates in their countries around these conversations we'll be having this weekend. And now, I've transitioned, in many ways, out of my role with Man Up, having started it, but now the work is becoming much, not necessarily broader, but much deeper. Mm-hmm. And we're also starting to do more work in the States as well, which we had not done before.
And often when we start conversations about gender violence or anything like that, the focus is on not doing things to girls and women, which is absolutely important, of course, absolutely vital. But I think the conversation that we're having and want to have over the weekend is really this issue of being a man, presenting a 12-year-old boy with this is what a man is, and this is what it isn't. Mm-hmm. That you're now working more, I think, aren't you, on helping boys and men think about what's healthy for them, what's great for a man to be. Can you just talk a little bit about the work that you're doing in schools and prisons in that way? And in fact, you said specifically that in prisons, when you go to them, men straight away talk about masculinity.
Some of the most powerful conversations I've had, the most powerful moments I've had in this part of my journey have been with men, young men, teenage boys who are incarcerated in places like Rikers Island in New York or in prisons. I was telling you yesterday, the U.S. State Department sent me to South Africa 2 years ago on a 2-week tour of South Africa, talking with men about masculinity, and identity. And on that trip in South Africa, I spent a lot of time going to prisons and a lot of time going to facilities where formerly incarcerated men, in the States we call them halfway houses, but where men, they're out of prison, but they haven't quite re-entered society yet. And I still think about that trip. Just these powerful conversations. And in the States, I do a lot of work even now. I just feel committed to this work. I do a lot of work now with young men in gangs, who are in the gangs, who are selling drugs, who are in the life, and maybe because they are in crisis and they know they're in crisis, they're the most receptive. When given the safe space, they're the most receptive to talking about, how do I break the cycle? How do I get out? This past summer, I was working with a group of teenage youth, mainly young women, in fact, but a few young boys as well. And over this past summer in New York City, we did a multimedia arts project where we documented every youth, which is, you can imagine in New York City, that was a big project, but we documented every youth who was killed from gun violence in New York City from June to September. So this summer, thankfully, it's not like Chicago or other places, but this summer was a good summer. There weren't as many deaths as there had been in the past. So this summer, there were about 30 kids who were killed from gun violence in that period of time, between June and September. And so we ended up going to a lot of funerals, going to crime scenes, talking to families who were at home grieving. Of course, most of the young people who killed were young boys or, young men. And I remember one day, I went to two funerals, which I'd never done before. I went to two funerals. One in the morning was in Brooklyn. The second funeral was in the Bronx. And the morning funeral was of a 15-year-old boy who was not in a gang, who was not selling drugs, and he was killed. He was riding his bicycle in his neighborhood in Brooklyn, and he was killed hanging out with some friends one evening in the summer. Someone drove by and shot him. And the second in person was like 18 years old, the one in the Bronx. He was in a gang, and it was a gang thing. It was the person who shot him, who he shot back. They were both. It was a gang rivalry, and the morning funeral in Brooklyn of the boy who was just riding his bicycle, his classmates came, his friends and family members came, and it was amazing. It was. I still think about it. It was amazing. These teenage boys were so distraught. Like after the funeral service, they were literally collapsing on the sidewalk. And from grief, they were, bowled over, like literally falling down in tears. And I was so stunned. I had never seen that before. The second funeral that day in the Bronx, these young men, the second group of young men, were wearing the mask. And I'm so happy that the young men, the students in the audience, will have the opportunity to see the mask you live in as part of this festival. A number of my colleagues in that film. It's very powerful. So I look forward to interacting and hearing your feedback after that film screening. But they were wearing that mask, so they didn't cry, they didn't show any emotion. Their faces were either very stoic or this forced laughter, this forced, I'm okay, this doesn't faze me, this is the life. Inside the funeral home, inside where the body was, the casket was open, the viewing period, inside the structure, I saw them crying, but they would turn away. They didn't want people to see they were crying. When they hit the sidewalk, hit the street, they were hard again, and it just struck me. It's like, wow, like this is what it is. This is what it looks like. This for so many people, this is what it looks like. They can't, they had this very fraught emotional journey that they're going through, that they hint at what's happening inside. But they won't let themselves go through it. They won't let themselves fully realize it. What they will do is they'll go back to their neighborhood. Maybe they'll get drunk. Maybe they'll smoke marijuana. Maybe they'll take harder drugs. Maybe they'll have sex. Maybe they'll force someone to have sex. Maybe they'll go out and get a gun and go out and try to shoot someone or go out and try to intimidate someone. Or maybe they'll go back home and harm themselves. And it's with those young men and those men, they're ready. Because they're so traumatized. They're so in crisis inside somewhere, they know they need help. They know they need to have a conversation. You know, we were saying yesterday, I think it's true, I know it's true, you know, there's a reason why some of this, and it's not just my organization or me, but so much of the work that's being done with men and boys around gender issues is done with men and boys who are middle class economically or economically challenged. They're of a certain minority in terms of ethnicity or race or religion. Somehow they're disenfranchised or disempowered. But it's hard to have. I met someone, Bilal, who I know he's here somewhere, earlier before the event started, who works for a bank, and it's interesting. That's the work that's most interesting to me. The conversation that can happen in corporate America, because again, this is universal. If you're a well-to-do white male who is not economically challenged, you're probably less likely to have this conversation. I mean, why should you? Life is generally pretty good.
But why should you?
I mean, of course, these issues, they're not women's issues. Often when you see the phrase gender or equality, more often than not, the presumption, at least among men, is that it's about women's issues. Mm-hmm. And I often just counter against that whenever I hear it or hear that retort because these issues really are human issues. It's not about male or female. It is, but ultimately it's about all of us and the connection and the disconnection because we're not able to show our full authentic selves or have full conversations, but also that inability and our harmful behavior to ourselves and with those we love and those we don't know, it affects all of us. And men sometimes say to me, well, what am I giving up? If I'm willing to have the conversation, but what do I have to give up for women to be equal or feel safe? I'm like, you're not giving up anything. You're gaining so much by actually recognizing that it serves all of us to have women on corporate boards and in positions of leadership, and have women feel safe, to go to the bathroom in some countries or to go get water in some countries, or to be able to walk around on a city street without being afraid of a man walking past her and being afraid to have her movement inhibited because she's a woman alone or with a small group of people and she feels vulnerable.
But presumably it benefits men to be able to realize that they're emotional beings with sensitivity and passions and vulnerability for themselves.
Absolutely, Jude. It comes out. I mean, that grief that those gang members didn't show in the Bronx, the hurts, the slights that we feel, the emotions, whatever they may be, that we feel we can't show because it will affect us professionally or affect our relationships or affect how people see us. It has to come out somehow. And if you can't show it authentically, in ways that are universal to all of us, it will come out. Those emotions will come out in other harmful ways.
Well, can I just say thank you so much for joining us?
Thank you so much.
Thank you.